You didn't choose your beliefs. They were installed. And now they protect themselves. Your own brain attacks any information that threatens them. That's the mechanism. Whoever controls what you believe controls how you act. No handcuffs, no visible coercion, just perception shaped since birth. Aldous Huxley described the brain as a valve that reduces infinite reality until only a miserable trickle of consciousness remains. Philip K. Dick called it the black iron prison, a structure that persists through centuries because no one realizes they're inside it. 8 billion people, a handful directing the planet. The formula is ancient. Fragment the population into groups with rigid beliefs, set those groups at perpetual war. While they fight each other, no one looks up. No one asks who designed the board.
One sentence summarizes decades of observation about how power really works. Whoever controls perception controls behavior. It seems too simple to be true. It's devastatingly accurate. Think about the mechanism. Make someone genuinely believe there's a deadly threat and that person will act as if the threat were real. Make someone believe their neighbor represents danger and that person will treat their neighbor as an enemy. The sequence never changes. First comes belief. Behavior follows automatically, like shadow follows body. This means something disturbing. Whoever can install beliefs in a population can determine how that population behaves, without physical force, without visible coercion, only through what people accept as true. Aldous Huxley dedicated much of his life to understanding this mechanism. The author of Brave New World wasn't just interested in dystopian fiction. He was mapping the real limits of human perception, and he reached a conclusion that should make us pause. The brain functions as a reducing valve. Let that idea sink in. Huxley proposed that each person, at every moment, would potentially be capable of accessing everything, complete memories, perceptions from anywhere in the universe, the totality of possible experience. We are, in his words, mind at large by nature. But there's a problem: survival. For a biological organism to navigate the physical world without being overwhelmed by infinite information, something must filter. Something must reduce the flow until only the essential remains for staying alive. That something is the brain. That's its primary function, not to expand consciousness, but to restrict it. What comes out the other side of the valve, Huxley described as a miserable trickle of consciousness. Just enough to survive, just what's necessary to not die. Everything else stays outside, inaccessible. Stop and consider what this implies. The world you experience is not the world as it exists. It's the world after passing through the filter of your nervous system. A dramatically reduced version, edited for biological utility, not for truth. Now add a layer. If the brain already naturally reduces perception, what happens when external forces learn to manipulate this valve? What happens when they discover how to narrow the trickle even further, or direct it where they want? The answer is all around us. Belief systems function as additional filters on top of already existing filters. Every doctrine you absorb without questioning adds another layer of reduction. Every unshakable certainty closes another door. The most serious problem isn't even the existence of external manipulators. It's that the prison maintains itself once installed. Observe how rigid beliefs work in practice. Once you accept something as absolute truth, your brain starts protecting that truth. Information that contradicts it causes discomfort, literally. There's a physical reaction, a resistance you feel in your body before even processing the content. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. But the technical name hides the raw reality. It's an immune system. The mental prison has developed self-defense mechanisms. It attacks anything that threatens its walls. Have you ever tried presenting evidence to someone deeply convinced of something? Have you noticed how the person not only rejects the information, but often comes out even more convinced than before? This isn't a character flaw, it's architecture. The system works exactly as designed. Huxley spent years seeking ways to cleanse the doors of perception, to expand the miserable trickle back toward the mind at large that remains latent in each of us. He explored altered states, contemplative practices, substances that temporarily suspend habitual filters. The most disturbing conclusion of all, most people don't even know there's something beyond the trickle. They live entire lives within the narrow band, allowed by the reducing valve, convinced that's all that exists. The perfect prison is one where the prisoner doesn't know they're imprisoned, and we grew up inside it. From birth, we absorb the filters of culture, family, institutions. Each filter seems natural because we never knew anything different. Each limit seems to be a limit of the world itself, not a limit of our perception of the world. The question that should haunt us isn't whether the prison exists, it's how many walls we still can't see. The world has 8 billion people, the number that actually determines the direction of humanity, not of a country, but of the entire planet, fits in a meeting room. How is this possible? The answer is so simple it seems impossible, so elegant it borders on insult. First step, fragment the population into belief systems, religions, political ideologies, economic theories. The content doesn't matter. What matters is the structure. Each system must be rigid. Each system must seem complete. Each system must clearly define who belongs and who's outside. Robert Anton Wilson spent decades studying this mechanism. Writer, philosopher, former Playboy editor, who became one of the most original thinkers about consciousness and social control, Wilson coined a term that perfectly captures the phenomenon: reality tunnel. The idea works like this. Each person develops through genetics, culture, education, and personal experiences a subconscious set of mental filters. These filters determine how the person interprets everything they encounter. Two individuals looking at the same event literally see different things because they're processing through different tunnels. Wilson insisted that truth is in the eye of the beholder. Every human being lives inside their own reality tunnel, their own artistic creation, whether they realize it or not. The tunnel edits automatically. Experiences that don't support your beliefs are minimized, ignored, or distorted. Experiences that confirm your beliefs gain prominence, are remembered, are shared. You don't need an external censor when the brain itself censors. You don't need propaganda when the person can only see what they already believe. Now observe the second step. Set these groups at war against each other. Christians against Muslims, left against right, progressives against conservatives, nationalists against globalists, each side convinced they represent good against evil, each side unable to see they're trapped in the same game. While they fight among themselves, nobody looks up. Nobody questions who designed the board. Wilson had a phrase that should be tattooed on the collective consciousness. Every kind of ignorance in the world all results from not realizing that our perceptions are gambles. We believe what we see, and then we believe our interpretation of it. We don't even know we are making an interpretation most of the time. We think this is reality. Pay attention to what he's saying. It's not that we interpret reality, it's that we don't even realize we're interpreting. We think our tunnel is the world. We think our gamble is established fact. And here's the dark genius of control. You don't need to manipulate each person individually. Just create the tunnels. Just establish the belief systems and let people divide themselves. They'll attack each other without any direct order. They'll defend their prisons with more fervor than any warden could demand. The same interests fund all sides of the conflict. The same groups profit from permanent division. But nobody investigates this because everyone's too busy fighting the designated enemy, the other tunnel, the other belief, the other team. Think about the public debates you follow: politics, religion, science, health. Each of these fields has fragmented into factions that can no longer communicate. Not because they speak different languages, but because they live in different tunnels. The same word means opposite things depending on who speaks it. Wilson offered a way out of this trap. Recognize that your tunnel is a tunnel. Understand that your perception is a gamble, not certainty. Develop the ability to visit other tunnels temporarily, not to adopt them, but to understand how other people experience what we call reality. Few accept the invitation, because leaving the tunnel, even temporarily, is profoundly uncomfortable. It means admitting you might be wrong. It means recognizing that your most precious certainties are constructions, not discoveries. Fragmentation works precisely because nobody wants to be a fragment. Everyone believes they're on the side of truth. Everyone believes the others are the deceived ones. And while this illusion persists, control remains invisible. The few who understand this mechanism don't need to control 8 billion minds. They only need to control the available tunnels. Create the options from which the masses will choose. Define the limits of acceptable debate. You can choose any tunnel you want, as long as it's one of the permitted tunnels. There's a formula, 3 moves, works every time. First, create a problem. Can be anything: terrorist attack, economic collapse, health crisis, external threat. What matters is that it generates fear, genuine, visceral fear, the kind that shuts down the ability to think clearly. Second, wait for the reaction. Frightened people don't want analysis, they want solutions. They demand something be done. The greater the fear, the greater the urgency. The greater the urgency, the less questioning. Third, offer the solution that was your goal from the beginning, the solution that would never be accepted under normal circumstances. But now, these aren't normal circumstances. Now, it's an emergency. Now it's an exception. Problem, reaction, solution. 3 steps to move entire populations in directions they would never consciously choose. The most disturbing detail of this formula is that you don't need a real problem. You need the perception of a problem. If you can convince a population that an existential threat exists, even if the threat is exaggerated, distorted, or completely fabricated, people will act as if it were real. Because for the brain, perception is reality. Fear works as a universal solvent. It dissolves resistance, dissolves skepticism, dissolves the limits that normally protect individual freedoms. In a state of fear, we accept things we would instantly reject in a state of calm. We hand over powers that would take decades to recover. Philip K. Dick spent the last years of his life trying to process a series of mystical experiences that transformed him. In 1974, the science fiction writer began having visions that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality. From these experiences was born the concept of the black iron prison. According to Dick, the prison represents a system of social control that obscures the true nature of existence. Everyone who ever lived was literally surrounded by the iron walls of the prison. Everyone was inside it, and nobody knew. Dick went even further. He claimed the Roman Empire never ended. What we see as history, the fall of Rome, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the modern era, would be falsified continuity. An illusion projected to hide that the same structure of control persists through centuries, changing only in form. We live, in his words, under a metastasized bureaucracy of time itself. The black iron prison is this bureaucracy, a system that reproduces, adapts, disguises itself, but never really changes in its essence. This vision echoes ancient Gnostic traditions, the material world as prison, divine sparks imprisoned in matter, secret knowledge, gnosis, as the only form of liberation. Dick wasn't inventing mythology. He was rediscovering something that earlier civilizations had already mapped. The problem-reaction-solution formula gains new dimension in this context. Every crisis is an opportunity for the prison to strengthen itself. Every collective fear is a pretext to tighten the bars, and the dark beauty of the system is that the victims themselves ask to be more controlled. They beg for security. They demand someone protect them. Dick saw hope in a precise direction. The prison, he claimed, is only a phantom, something without real substance that continues existing only because we haven't awakened. Just as a vampire loses power in daylight, the prison has no power in the light of awakened consciousness. The idea is to break the Black Iron Prison's power by revealing more and more about it. Exposure as antidote, consciousness as kryptonite. There's an even more subtle variation of the basic formula. Problems that affect localities can justify local solutions, but problems that seem to affect all humanity simultaneously, pandemics, climate change, technological threats, justify solutions that affect all humanity simultaneously. If you want global transformation, you need a global crisis, or at least the perception of a global crisis. The prison bars aren't made of metal, they're made of shared perception, of collective fears, of solutions accepted in a state of panic that later become permanent. Every emergency leaves residue. Every exception becomes normalized. Every temporary power forgets to be returned. The formula works because it exploits real vulnerabilities of the human psyche, our ancestral fear of threats, our need for security, our tendency to trust authorities during crises. None of this is a moral flaw. It's evolutionary architecture being used against us. The only defense is seeing the mechanism while it operates, recognizing the formula the moment it's being applied, asking in the face of every new emergency, what solution is being prepared? Who benefits from this crisis? Is the fear proportional to the real risk? Simple questions, rarely asked, because asking these questions in public is risky. It's being labeled. It's leaving the approved tunnel. A truth should be taught to every child the moment they can understand it. When you look through your eyes, you're not seeing everything that exists in the space you observe. You're seeing only a tiny band of frequency called visible light. That's it, a minuscule slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. The rest, radio waves, microwaves, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, exists in the same space where you're sitting now. Your body simply doesn't have the receptors to decode these frequencies. Think of old analog radio stations. They all shared the same space. They all transmitted simultaneously, but you only heard one at a time. The dial determined which frequency your device decoded. The others didn't stop existing. You just didn't have access to them. Your body works exactly the same way. It's a biological radio device tuned to a very narrow station, the station called physical reality. Everything that exists outside this band remains invisible, inaudible, imperceptible, but no less real. Aldous Huxley explored this frontier directly. In 1953, under medical supervision, he ingested mescaline and documented the experience in the book that would become a classic, The Doors of Perception. The title comes from a phrase by the poet William Blake that deserves repeating. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it really is, infinite. Blake wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. Ordinary perception functions like a dirty, foggy door that allows only a fragment of what exists on the other side to pass through. Huxley recorded profound transformations in how he perceived colors, textures, meanings. Banal objects became radiant with presence. Time stretched and compressed. The habitual categories we use to separate one thing from another began to dissolve. Where previous researchers described these states as distortions or disorders, Huxley did something different. He recognized he wasn't perceiving less reality, he was perceiving more. The reducing valve had been temporarily opened. The miserable trickle was expanding back toward mind at large. Huxley argued that our ancestors sought this type of experience through various methods: fasting, sensory deprivation, breathing practices, rituals that induced altered states. Why? To periodically escape what he called the stifling prison of their presumptuously rationalist philosophy. Modern science has given us extraordinary tools to manipulate the narrow band in which we live. We've built cities, machines, communication networks, but these same tools can make us forget that the narrow band isn't all that exists, that our technological success happens within limits we rarely question. The most disturbing implication is this: if there are frequencies of reality we don't perceive, then our model of the world is necessarily incomplete. All our certainties are based on partial data. All our theories explain only the slice we can access. What if there are entities, forces, or dimensions operating on frequencies we don't pick up? The question seems like science fiction until you remember it would be science fiction for an earthworm to imagine radio waves. The worm doesn't have the apparatus to detect them, but they exist. They pass through its tiny body every second. Huxley hoped that substances like mescaline could function as tools for controlled expansion, not for escapism, for exploration, to map territories that ordinary perception doesn't reach. The valve could be temporarily opened. What would be discovered on the other side? He wasn't naive about the risks. He knew that opening the valve without adequate preparation could result in overload, confusion, even damage. But he also knew that keeping the valve permanently closed had its own cost, the cost of living in prison without knowing the walls exist. The visible spectrum occupies less than 1% of the total electromagnetic spectrum, less than 1%, and even within that 1%, our brain edits, filters, organizes. What we call reality is a construction within a construction within a construction. Each layer of filter can be a survival tool. Each layer can also be a barrier to broader understanding. The difference is knowing the layers exist, recognizing that the map is not the territory, and that our map shows only a minuscule fraction of the real territory. The narrow band isn't the limit of the universe, it's the limit of the instrument we use to observe it. A phrase attributed to Socrates crosses the centuries because it captures something essential. To know is to know that one knows nothing. It seems like a paradox. It seems like wordplay. It's the foundation of all genuine knowledge. The reason is simple and devastating. When you believe you already know, you stop investigating. Curiosity dies. The door closes. The prison is complete, not because someone locked it from outside, but because you yourself threw the key out the window. Robert Anton Wilson transformed this ancient perception into an operational principle for mental navigation. Belief, he stated, is the death of intelligence. As soon as someone believes in a doctrine of any kind or assumes certainty, they stop thinking about that aspect of existence. Think about what this means. Every absolute certainty is a mental territory you've stopped exploring. Every unquestionable belief is a locked room in the mansion of your consciousness. You might have dozens of these rooms, hundreds, most people do. Wilson wasn't proposing we live in a state of permanent confusion. He was proposing something more subtle. A healthy mind would be a mind in constant motion, capable of holding provisional positions without fusing with them, capable of defending ideas without transforming them into identity, capable of changing when evidence changes. Believing absolutely, in his words, was dying intellectually. The fanatic, of any kind, is someone who stopped in time, who fossilized in a position and now defends that position not because it's true, but because abandoning it would mean dying symbolically. 20th century physics confirmed this intuition in an unexpected way. Relativity demonstrated there's no privileged point of observation. What you measure depends on where you are and how you move. Quantum mechanics went even further. The act of observing affects what's observed. Reality at the fundamental level seems to resist absolute definitions. Wilson connected these discoveries to everyday experience. What you discover with your instruments, including the instrument of your body and brain, is true only in relation to the instrument you're using and where that instrument is located in space-time. There's no point of view from which real reality can be seen without filters. We're all looking from the point of view of our own tunnels. So what to do? Give up knowing anything? The path proposed by Wilson was different. Recognize the tunnel as a tunnel. Keep it flexible. Develop the ability to temporarily visit other tunnels, other perspectives, other models. Have empathy with different ways of organizing experience without necessarily adopting them. He and other thinkers, like John C. Lilly, who studied consciousness through sensory deprivation tanks, taught that tunnels can be deliberately modified. Techniques exist: meditation that suspends the habitual flow of thought, neuro-linguistic deprogramming practices, hypnosis, biofeedback devices, controlled use of substances that temporarily dissolve filters, forced acting out of perspectives different from your own. The goal isn't to destroy the tunnel. You need some tunnel to function. The goal is to make it a conscious tool instead of an automatic prison, knowing that you have a model of the world instead of confusing your model with the world itself. Contemplative traditions mapped this territory for millennia before modern psychology was born. Zen Buddhism uses koans, questions without logical answers, to short-circuit habitual thinking. Sufism uses stories that only make sense after you abandon the usual way of interpreting. Shamanic practices use drums, chants, and plants to temporarily dissolve the limits of the ordinary self. Different methods, same direction. Loosen the grip. Remember that the map is not the territory. Experience, even briefly, states where the tunnel walls become transparent. Wilson had an important warning. Excessive flexibility can lead to paralysis. If nothing is true, then anything goes, including destructive things. The antidote isn't abandoning all judgment, but recognizing that judgments are provisional. Updatable maps, gambles that can be revised when new cards are revealed. The difference between a living mind and a dead mind isn't raw intelligence, it's mobility, the capacity to keep learning, willingness to be wrong, courage to update the model when the model fails. The death of intelligence isn't stupidity, it's certainty. And resurrection begins when you admit that maybe, just maybe, you don't know as much as you thought. The prison only works while you don't know you're imprisoned. The instant you perceive the bars, something changes. Not automatically, not easily, but irreversibly. Philip K. Dick named this moment anamnesis. The word comes from Greek and literally means loss of forgetting. It's not learning something new. It's remembering something you always knew but were forced to forget. The Black Iron Prison, in Dick's vision, represents the state in which we all live until we're capable of experiencing gnosis, direct knowledge, unmediated completeness. Before that moment, we exist in amnesia. We forget who we are. We forget where we came from. We forget that the walls around us were built, not born with the universe. Dick claimed the prison is only a phantom, something without real substance that continues existing only because we fell asleep. The empire, this system of control that crosses centuries changing form, is described as an entity that would lose all power if enough people opened their eyes simultaneously. Huxley contrasted two visions in his works of fiction. In Brave New World, he presented soma, a substance used by the state to keep the population docile, satisfied, incapable of questioning. Soma functions as a tool of social engineering, repressing the deepest longings and highest aspirations of the human soul. Chemical sleep, voluntary prison, manufactured happiness. In his final novel, Island, Huxley presented moksha, the mirror image of Soma. Where Soma puts to sleep, moksha awakens. Where Soma imprisons through pleasure, moksha liberates through expanded perception. The difference isn't in the substance itself, it's in the intention behind its use. Control versus liberation, amnesia versus anamnesis. Wilson offered a practical path for this transition. Reality tunnels, he insisted, can be expanded, can be made more flexible, can even be temporarily dissolved so something larger can be glimpsed. Deprogramming techniques exist and work. Meditation that silences mental noise. Contemplative practices that reveal the observer behind thoughts. Systematic questioning of assumptions that seemed too obvious to question. The way out of the prison isn't external revolution. Armies don't liberate minds. Governments don't expand consciousness. Transformation happens one individual at a time, from within, through a change in the way of perceiving. But there's a paradox here. If the prison is made of perception, and perception is shaped by mechanisms operating below the conscious radar, how does someone manage to change from the inside out? How do you use the mind to escape traps the mind itself built? The answer emerging from these thinkers converges on a common point. You don't escape alone. Help is available. Practices developed over millennia. Tools tested by generations of seekers. Maps drawn by those who've already made the journey. The path doesn't need to be invented from scratch. It needs to be found and traveled. The solitude of each individual consciousness isn't condemnation. It's the starting point. Nobody wakes up in another's place. But upon awakening, you discover something the prison hides. You were never really alone. Others awakened before. Others are awakening now. And the network of awakened consciousnesses grows silently, while the prison keeps thinking it has everything under control. Huxley, Wilson, Dick, each mapped part of the territory. Each pointed to different exits from the same prison, and the very existence of their work proves that escape is possible, that the valve can be opened, that tunnels can be expanded, that the black iron prison can be seen for what it really is, a persistent illusion that dissolves in the light of awakened consciousness. Today, you can access states of expanded perception without decades of monastic training. We've developed audio tools based on frequencies that help the mind leave its habitual pattern, that temporarily silence the reducing valve, that allow glimpses of what exists beyond the miserable trickle of ordinary consciousness. To discover how to activate this portal and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."